Hello, everyone. We're delighted to have you back on our weekly live stream show. This is part of Growing You Online, which is our offering to support people to thrive in times of crisis. Welcome, everyone. And just to remind you, there is a chat. You can type in there and say where you're from. And in a minute, we're going to start the panel. Today's panel, as you can see on the screen, is People at the Center, and it's part of our Leadership and Change series. Um, just a couple of things. Um, this panel is part of our Grow You series, as I said, and this is the schedule for the week. Make sure to tune in for tomorrow's sessions. And this is the schedule for next week. We'll talk more about that at the end of the panel. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. We all know that in times like this, one of our most valuable things we can do is connect with our own emotions and one another in an emotionally intelligent way. In the meantime, as I said, say hello in the chat and tell us where you're from. While we're waiting, let me tell you about a couple of the classes on the schedule. One of my favorite, actually, my most favorite one is the Climate of Emotion panel that is going to happen next Tuesday, which you shouldn't miss. It's going to be a very exciting series of sessions for the day, celebrating Earth Day on the Earth Day's Eve. And if you haven't checked, if you haven't participated in any of the meditation series on Earth Day, also we're going to have a series of 3 sessions, starting with the meditation one, which I highly recommend. Okay. So if you want to sign up for the classes, just a reminder to check in on sigsec.org/growu, and I know the chat host will put it on the chat. And I would say, let's go. I'd like to introduce to you all the panelists and leave the word to our moderator of the day, Joshua Freedman, CEO of 6 Seconds.
Well, it is a great pleasure. Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here. I'm so excited about this panel, and I'll tell you a little bit why later, but I'm just going to actually jump in and let the panelists share a little bit, and maybe you'll get to see why I'm so excited about this. Panelists, what I'd like you to do is introduce yourselves by answering a question, and I want you to answer in 30 seconds. Tell us a little something about you. And from that perspective, in these last few weeks, what's something you've either wished for or something you've really appreciated from an organizational leader? And Mark, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. I'm Mark Crowley, or Mark C. Crowley, since there's another Mark Crowley out there in the world, and I'm in La Jolla, California, where I've been exclusively for the last 30 days. And I'm going a little stir crazy, but generally I will say that, what I've kind of come to realize is that it's a binary activity of leadership that's happening right now. We're seeing people either rise to the occasion or fall on the occasion. And so my aspiration is to see more leaders recognize that this is a time to really demonstrate care and love and concern for people and making sure that people are thriving in this environment. And unfortunately, you're seeing some organizations and managers and leaders specifically excel at this, and you're seeing others trip and fall over what I think are really low hurdles. And another component of this, Josh, would be communication, the inability to keep a vision and keeping a team cohesive. I'm seeing in organizations, and I'm quite surprised by it, to be honest with you.
Great, thank you. Mark, Yvette, how about for you? Tell us a little intro and your 30-second answer.
Hey, hi, everybody. My name is Yvette Bethel, and I help organizations that have complex people problems and cultural challenges to move through them. And one of the things I appreciated is that one of the CEOs that I work with, he came to me and he said, Yvette, I talk about us being a family, And I want to be sure that every step of the way that I make decisions in this crisis, that I'm actually adhering to what I say that I value. And I found that quite powerful that he actually wanted to do it, because a lot of times values are espoused, and until they're tested, you can really see if they're real.
Thanks, Yvette. Alex, how about you?
Hey guys, my name is Alex Schwartz. I'm the founder of this disrupted workforce. And it's been really interesting to kind of lean into this time and talk to people, not only as corporate leaders and company leaders, but also to folks in HR. And one interesting conversation I had with a close friend in Chicago was around this notion that, you know, a lot of companies are taking a very hard look at the C-suite and thinking about, you know, getting folks out fast who are underperforming, people that are really unable to make critical decisions, not only macro decisions, but also critical decision making at a micro level to respond to the crisis. And I think, you know, also just really looking for leaders who not just know about the business, but work in the business and truly understand the roles that their employees are playing on a day-to-day basis and working at, so that they can respond with true empathy and understanding, as opposed to just, you know, 10,000 feet up, which is not, you know, serving people who are, you know, really struggling to navigate this complicated new environment.
And Angela.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela from Adelaide, Australia. So it's 7:30 in the morning here, but I founded a company called Emotus, and our mission is really to unlock the greatness in people and organizations. So I guess, you know, when I think about, I've just been asked to step in, a client of mine asked me to step into an interim ASPAC head of people for the last, so I've been in that role 8 days. And one of the things, so nothing like stepping in a crisis, but that said, one of the things that I've really appreciated is that I've really been, you know, serving and listening a lot in these last few days. And I got a call yesterday from somebody at the beginning of the day who said, "How are you going?" And that was such a gift, because I feel like what I'm seeing is the contagion of anxiety. And I think it speaks to what, Alex, you're talking about, the inability for leaders right now to make decisions. So, and looking at the leadership at the C-suite and in the senior level to help fuel the optimism, the empathy, and the calmness to be able to move through these times. So that was a real nugget for me yesterday. Someone took the time to actually pause and check in.
And for those who don't speak Australian, how are you going?
G'day, mate.
It's a little like, how are you feeling, right?
Exactly. How you doing?
I'd like to take the conversation to a more personal level for a minute. And Mark, let's come back to you with this question first. We are all in roles where we're doing some amount of leadership, whether that's in our own lives, in our workplaces, in our communities, with our people who we're supporting on Twitter, which is where Mark and I met. This has been an intensely difficult period for me as a leader. And I suspect for many of you, I never imagined, and I was totally unprepared. I was largely unprepared for the depth of this challenge and the balancing of the emotional needs and the organizational needs. And I suppose in any challenge like that, there's a lot of learning. I'm not quite sure what I've learned yet, so I thought I would turn this over to you all to ask you to share what's something you're learning or maybe learned in the last few weeks about your own leadership. So Mark, what's something you learned?
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. I've worked in financial services for a lot of my career. And if you know anything about that industry, there's been a lot of consolidations and failures. And so when this happened, when we were forced to live at home and work at home, and I'm a professional speaker, and so no more travel. All of a sudden I realized, okay, our world is very, very challenged, and I could see what was coming. None of this is a surprise to me. And so going off of that intuition, I said, what's the choice that I'm going to make here? And so my choice has been to help. So I've gotten some extraordinary people to come on my own podcast with the intention of saying, here's where we are, here's how we navigate that. So day to day, week to week, I've written more articles. So, and then I'm sort of picked up my pace even more on Twitter, really trying honestly to affect people in their hearts in a way that people can feel like there's somebody out there that cares about them, that knows what they're going through. So even if they're working for an organization, I've been out there long enough so people can kind of expect that from me. But if I can turn that flame up a little bit and make sure that people feel like this is somebody that truly has advice that's relevant, that's useful, that's helpful, but also is coming from the right place. And I'm seeing it's having an impact. I'm seeing it in terms of the numbers of people that are listening to the podcast and just the responses that I get from people. And so I just kind of feel like I'm in this situation where I have enough life experience in all aspects to be of help. And so I'm just choosing to step up and do that. So, and it's gratifying for me too, because for the anxiety that you're feeling, we all feel that anxiety. But if I get up every morning thinking I got a lot to do, that keeps me from, drinking and going insane like everybody else feels right now.
Yvette, what did you just hear in Mark's answer? Given your orientation to work and what's important to you, I could just see you as Mark was talking. I could see your face and yep. What did you just hear?
Yeah, it felt like I was talking. I'm hearing from Mark that this is a time for reinvention. And the one thing that stood out for me that you were saying, Mark, is that service and purpose have come to the forefront and really defining that. And maybe in some cases redefining. I don't know, we haven't had a deeper conversation, but it also resonated with me that it wasn't a surprise to you, because it wasn't a surprise to me either. I saw it coming. It was coming since last year. And so, I completely resonate with what you've said.
Angela, let's talk about this topic, the title of today's session, People at the Center. So you're in a role now, both as a consultant and helping out a client, where you, like all of us, have a responsibility to the organization and to the business, and an organization, a responsibility to people. What's going on for you in that? Is there a tension between those? How are you reconciling that?
I guess, when I look at, leading every day, and I was just thinking about what was being said, the necessity to keep people, the key thing that I'm seeing is, the tactical things need to be done, the task and function of the business needs to run, yet making sure we're balancing that with helping people to navigate the emotional needs that people have in change. So, and there's a tension between that, because right now in this business, actually, there's a lot of what we call surge response, in that we're actually recruiting thousands of people in frontline roles. So task is taking, precedence, and I'm seeing the necessity to help people to navigate emotions and exercise self-care. So, pausing, stopping. Yes, we've got tasks to do, but actually, how do we make sure we're checking in with one another, maintaining ourselves? I've been using the analogy, we need to put the oxygen mask on ourselves so we can then support others. So that the big thing that's hitting home for me is, the necessity to help people center, focus, practice self-care, tune in, be aware as we're going about trying to deliver on task, make decisions quickly, so that we're cognizant, we're able to see what's around us. So, and there is that tension because the outcomes, we need to get them done quickly. We need to ramp up quickly in this business. Yet at the same time, the tendency for people to be working long hours, navigating work, home, kids, family, schooling, that people matter, that you matter. So that's been my message. You matter. We've got to put our own oxygen mask on.
Hey, Angela, I would love to hear you say a little bit more about that, because I think you're spot on. It really is this very, very delicate balance between being empathetic, being vulnerable yourself, and saying, hey, a lot of these things that you're feeling, I'm feeling too. I'm going through craziness in my home life, whatever it is. But still having the strength and conviction of a leader to say, but how are we going to get all this done? So what is that sort of secret sauce that how do you thread that needle between, you're talking to somebody, I hail from New York City, you're talking to somebody who's, in a one-bedroom apartment with 3 kids running around, all homeschooling, everybody's on laptops and everything, all of that craziness, and say, hey, we're on deadline, but I feel your pain.
Yeah.
I feel your pain, but get going anyway.
Yeah, totally.
It's interesting. I think one of the things that I'm seeing is the necessity to be vulnerable yourself. So there's that capacity to be able to share authentically with the people you're leading, and appropriately here, because I think there's a fine line, and lift people up with optimism and create line of sight, which I think speaks to what people are talking about here, having a purpose, having a vision. I've got down to what do we need to accomplish, and really trying to get clear about that from a task perspective, because I think we know that anxiety is a contagion, and it's a contagious emotion, which then clouds judgment, diminishes optimism, and then people get into overwhelm. So I've tried to, the daily stand-up huddle, I'm having those with people, and, very connected yet focused, and deep listening, engaging these skills of deep listening for people.
Thank you, Angela. Mark, let's come back to you on this same theme. So let's talk about the emotional part of it. So how does that feel, what Angela's talking about, how does that feel for you, and what do you do with the emotional part of this?
It's all emotions as far as I'm concerned. There's not a lot of intellectual stuff going on right now as far as people are concerned, whether they realize it or not. It's all how they feel, and whether or not an organization is making people feel in a way that enables them or disables them, because they're already in a state of disequilibrium as far as I'm concerned. And I think, Angela, as I was listening to you, I think you have like this fantastic opportunity, because you're not the real HR person, but they're looking to you to be the HR person for as long as you're there. So you can really step out. You can really say, I can be like the full person that I know I need to be and want to be, without the political, stuff that
That's
comes
so true
when you've been with an organization for a long time. I had, this won't come out until next Friday, but Eric Larson, who's got the current #1 best-selling book in the world. It's called The Splendid and the Vile, and it's about Winston Churchill and his leadership over a 1-year period, from the period of 1940 to 41, when he first became prime minister, and what really truly defined him as Winston Churchill as we know him. And one of the things that Winston Churchill did that I think is critical, that I'm seeing not happening, and perhaps that's why he's such a genius, but it's a practice that we can all emulate, which is to say that we're making tough decisions. So here's the tough decision. Here's the circumstances. Giving people the brutal truth, truly giving them the truth, like unvarnished. This is the risk. This is what we're dealing with. This could happen. And then going into a sense of optimism. Here's why we're hopeful. Here's why we're optimistic. Here's why you should be encouraged. So it was deliberate in everything that he did, everything that he wrote, everything he spoke, all of his communications were patterned in that way. And so because of the recency effect, but also because of the trusting element, which is he's telling me everything that's truthful, then I do have reason to be optimistic because I'm working for an organization or a leader or a CEO who is trustworthy just by virtue of the fact that they're willing to open the kimono and share everything. I think that's a really powerful activity right now. And people are reluctant to do it because they think, well, you're going to scare the hell out of people, or, you know, people are going to have a bad reaction. But what Churchill found repeatedly, when, you know, 57 nights of being bombed and, you know, thousands and thousands of people are being killed, including children, that people retain their hope because they had a realistic understanding of what might be coming.
I love that so much, Mark. And if I could just build on that for 1 second. I think, you know, one of the challenges right now is that these news cycles are so fast and that things are changing so fast that, yes, 100% you have to lead with openness and earn that trust and be brutally honest. But at the same time, you have to recognize that, you know, things are changing day by day. So I think, you know, a lot over communicating on topics of what we do know, what we don't know, and what are we trying to find out. I think that's really, really useful. And I was thinking back coming on today to, you know, the financial crisis. And the financial crisis in many ways was a crisis of trust and transparency, right? And we lost so much trust in so many institutions at that time. And I don't know that, you know, corporate America has ever really fully recovered in some ways. And if you look at the S&P and top performing companies, a lot of those espouse values of trust and transparency. So, you know, exactly what you're speaking about, I think, is even more important than ever, you know, in this moment in time. From a communication.
I want to come back to this question of trust because it's so central. And first, I just want to tell you a tiny story. I just had a conversation with one of our team members. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, we're in the middle of this rollout of the economic package the US government has created. And it's not going super smoothly, and it's affecting different types of employees and contractors in some very unpredictable ways. And so I just before this had a conversation with one of our team members. And inside, I really wanted to be able to say, I have some clarity about this. I know it's going to happen. I'm going to, you know, we can help you. Like, that's what I wanted to be able to say. And what I could honestly say is, I don't know. This doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to do my best that we figure this out one way or another. And it was like, it's just so hard to be able to be honest about not knowing.
No,
and go Yvette.
I was going to share with you that, well, as you know, most of you know, my wheelhouse is trust. And I think in the Edelman Trust Barometer for the last year, I think for 2020, it shows where governments and the media are still not trusted. And so with all of this coming out through those, you know, two vehicles, very difficult. And just to speak to transparency, with the trust style inventory that I co-created with 6 Seconds, it is showing exactly what you're talking about. One of the things that's coming out of the sample is that trust is, when people approach trust, they're approaching it with emotion predominantly. And so their emotional mastery is what is most prominent within their style of trusting. On the back end, what we're finding with the research is that the majority of people, the majority of the opportunities for growth have to do with transparency. And what's interesting is that whenever we have a conversation with these people, they see themselves as honest people with integrity. But because the situation is one where they're in survival mode and unsafe, 10 times out of 10, when we debrief it, we realize that the integrity score has to do largely with transparency, and they're feeling that they are not able to be transparent. So on one end, you have the organization that's not being transparent with staff. And on the other end, we're seeing that staff members are not being transparent with the organization.
It's interesting because one of the things that I'm observing is, and I think it speaks to what you're saying, is when we're thinking about trust, if there's no self-trust, and I think people's capacity right now to trust themselves, to have this grounded confidence, to have a transparent conversation it comes back to courage, that, having courageous conversations, putting things on the table. And then I think that connects back to having a grounded sense of confidence, clarity about your values, and being able to step into that. So I'm observing that people's innate sense of confidence is being shaken at the core. And as such, then people are held back from having conversations. So I'm getting a lot of people coming to me to have a conversation on their behalf. And when I speak, support them, I'm really supporting them in coming back to self-belief and grounding to their own sense of confidence and optimism. So which is being shaken to the core right now.
And you're absolutely right. Every time I work with leaders with regard to building trust within the teams, we can never do it without starting with them trusting themselves and taking a look at their self-talk and their narratives. And so self-trust has become the primary focus of the trust work that we're doing, because it's impossible to help people to trust the company or management if they don't trust themselves. And it's hard to get there if they weren't trusted by the company previously, because they were always under the control of policies and procedures. And so if they never had the discretion to make decisions, now is a difficult time.
I want to go to a different feeling for a minute. Trust is one that I love talking about. But I want to talk about one we don't normally talk about in our workplace and leadership conversations, and that is love. Mark, you and I had a little exchange on Twitter where you asked a question and I don't remember what it was, but I responded that I just am feeling a deeper sense of love for my team.
Well, I'm actually grateful that you're pointing this to me, because just one thought that I have for you personally that was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, is that I sense in you that you care so much that you took this challenge that you're faced where people aren't getting paid and the complications of that very personally. And when you take it personally, what that does is it upends your ability to be objective and say, like Alex was saying, here's what we know, here's what we're trying to know, here's what we think our timeline's going to be. I'm sorry we don't know any better, but the other thing that Yvette was alluding to that I think is important here is that if you didn't have trust before this isn't the time to be establishing it. If people didn't go into this trusting you, right? So having said that, let me address your other question, which I'm very happy to do, which is that I wrote a book called Lead from the Heart. And I paid a woman $10,000 to help me. I came out of financial services, had no platform, nobody knew who I was. And so I gave her the book and $10,000 check, and I asked her specifically, help me build a brand and get awareness around this book. And what she said was, after she had done her work and cashed the check, that's the important part. She said, and I'm hoping that this is an audience that can take a direct quote. She said, Mark, you're going to fucking fail if you continue to use the words lead from the heart. So I had to make a decision. Do I keep going with this? Do I own this? and take the punches that are going to come, because that's what she was really telling me, is that the world isn't ready to talk about heart in leadership. So love just is a greater dimension of that, right? So
an even scarier word than heart.
yeah, I mean, if you can't handle heart, you can't handle love, right? So, but what I have found is that, you know, my philosophy is that feelings and emotions drive all of our behavior anyway. So that's all we should be focusing on. If you can influence people emotionally, they'll have the intellectual connections that will drive their behavior the way you want them to. I fundamentally believe that. But what's interesting is that we know that human beings are hardwired to thrive on positive emotions, and that all positive emotions boil down to love. So if you are a cynic and think love is a, you know, bullshit thing that we shouldn't have in business, I can say to you, okay, you can have that too. However, if you just accept it as a tool, that love is really what people need in order to thrive. And if you give people what they need in order to thrive, and you don't call it love, you just demonstrate it through care and demonstrate it through trust and recognition and growth and all those kinds of things, people will feel it. And that's all you need. So you never need to use the word love. But if you're comfortable with it, so much the better. But if you're not, it still works. So people have to embrace this, and we're going to get there. And I truly believe that this unbelievable circumstance we're in right now is forcing people into consider, what's my life? What's my purpose? Am I working for the right company? Does my boss care about me? All that stuff is going on right now. And when people go back to work, they're going to be like, I need so much more from you. I really, truly believe that this is where we're going.
I'd love to jump in on this one, if I may. I love what both you guys shared, and you know, it is a tricky word, right? Because in certain organizations, if you're putting the word "I love you" in emails, you know, HR is going to come to
HR department is.
Let's be honest. But there's a lot of derivatives of love, Mark. To your point, I mean, there are words like compassion, there are words like gratitude. I have been deeply interested in the crisis of loneliness that's been occurring in this country. Recent Cigna study before this crisis was showing that, you know, more than 2/3 of Americans are feeling some form of loneliness, and now we've got, you know, everybody shut in. They're missing, you know, all that face-to-face time with their colleagues in the office. Everybody's on Zoom, and if you're not on Zoom, then you're texting, or you're, you know, using your devices in some other way. So the face-to-face time is great because we've got I think 250,000 facial expressions that we can use. So you can really create empathy and create trust and create love that way. But I think it's so critical to celebrate your employees and to show gratitude and show compassion at this point in moment, because chances are they are feeling more isolated. They are feeling more lonely than ever. And bringing them into the organization with you know, those sub values of love, I think is mission critical. One quote that I heard I really enjoyed, Dr. Vivek Murthy was the 19th Surgeon General of the US, and he's just written a book on loneliness. And I saw him at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and he said, more powerful than any prescription I ever wrote is the power of love. I thought that was great.
So I want to give Angela and Yvette a chance to comment on this, then we'll go on to our next question. So,
you know, I'll go on. I was just going to add to what you were saying, Mark, because it's interesting. This morning I got up, yesterday there was an issue, it crossed my desk, and you know, it was dealt with. And this morning a leader acknowledged me for that, resolving that issue. And literally it passed through me. So I had, it was just one conversation, and I just acknowledged in that email, you know, the gratitude of this reporting division within the business, how they jumped in, they got it solved, and the importance of pausing and, you know, giving thanks. It's in the little actions that create, whether it's, you know, these are acts of love, you know, compassion, empathy, gratitude, kindness, how they show up in the daily moments. And I call them the sliding door moments of leadership, where you pause, you acknowledge, and you pass on. So, and I think this is critical right now, because we're seeing, along with love, one of the other emotions that I think is difficult to talk about in organization is grief and loss. We're seeing a lot of loss, change, which comes with change, but grief and sadness, which people have a lot of discomfort about, but shows up in people feeling disorientated.
Yvette.
I'm looking at Tom's question.
Yeah.
You say, what might be some reasons why people don't use the word love? And I started thinking about years ago when I worked full time, and in one of my memos, I put the word feel. I feel whatever. I don't remember the context. And I was writing for my boss at the time, and he took a red pen and he's like, "You can't say the word feel." And he was like upset about it. And they tried to train me not to say it. But because in their minds, it was a show of weakness. They didn't recognize the strength in feelings and emotions. They only saw it as something that they didn't want to touch. And so if an organization is coming from that place before all of this happens, it's very difficult to connect at the heart.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so there's this interesting puzzle here, which is how do we see people in organizations, and fundamentally, it's in some ways, if we actually care about each other, some things are harder, right? Like when we have to not pay people, or when we have to make change that people don't like. In some ways, it's easier if we're more dispassionate. But there's a tremendous cost to that mental model. And I think, that is the mental model that predominates. It's why we call people human resources instead of people.
Correct. It's also that we have always wanted to have the most intellectual people going into management roles. So, leave your troubles at the door. We don't want to get involved. We don't get your life. We don't really want to get to know you. Just do your job. You get a paycheck, you get your rewards and benefits, and that's pretty much the transaction. And that just doesn't work for people anymore. It's interesting that actually not far from here where I went to undergrad, UCSD, there's a professor there that did this analysis, and he found that that the communication that is shared on Facebook, it was Facebook, that's where they did the study, but it's true for all social media, that it doesn't just impact the person that's seeing it, it impacts 2 other steps beyond that, right? So your friend and your friend's friend is being influenced by what I said on Facebook is basically the premise. But what's really fascinating right now is that those 3 steps are all in the same house, right? So I can say something to you, Josh, and 5 minutes later, you walk out the door and you talk to your partner or your kids or your neighbor and all this, right? People who are living in your house. And all of a sudden, I've had a powerful impact on everybody in your family. So if people are feeling stressed the way Angela was talking about, and grief, which is clearly true, and lonely, which is what Alex was talking about, which all these are going on, and then they have a boss saying, where are you on this project? And they're not saying, how are you? Is this a good time to talk? How are you feeling? Let's take 5 minutes to talk about that before we get to work. You're now going to impact the kids, the spouse, the mom, whoever's living there. We can do a lot of positive or a lot of negative during these times, and people will never forget whatever that impact was when this is all over.
I think that's an important point that I keep making on this show, is that we are in a time where everything is magnified, and a little thing feels like a big thing. And that applies to the messes and the screw ups and the things that are paining us. But as Angela was saying, it also applies to just these small kindnesses, the recognition of each other, that little bit of space that we're giving each other. Well, I want to make sure everyone watching that you're welcome to ask questions, and we love that. And somehow we're already getting into our not the end, but towards the end of our of our show. I want to ask you to think about this from the point of view. I asked you what you're learning. So let's suppose you learn whatever it is that you need to learn in this particular crisis. How is your message? How is your leadership? How is your commitment to what it means to lead? How is that going to be different whenever it is that we can say we're on the other side of this? Alex, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. It's a really good question. I think one thing I've really been grappling with as somebody who came from a company that facilitated digital business transformation for so many years is this paradox, which is the need to be digital versus how does being digital make us feel. So as we step into this post-COVID world, my expectation, one of my expectations, is that people will continue to work from home quite a bit more. And as a result of that, I think when and how we use our digital tools for human connection, I think that's going to be absolutely mission critical. So I think communication skills, really understanding not only from a leadership perspective, but empowering people to understand, when do you send a text? When do you send an email? When do you pick up the phone? When do you do a video call? And when do you actually get people into the office? I think there's going to be a whole set of new road rules. Let me rephrase. I think there needs to be a whole new set of road rules around those things to create the right sense of belonging and the right sense of behaviors and the right sense of import for what to do with each of these channels. So that's something that I'm going to be taking a much harder look at.
Angela, let's go to you and maybe go to a little bit more of the heart side of this. I know that you've been juggling a lot of difficult things, and I imagine that's shaping some of your perspective about what it means to be a leader in times like this. So what are you going to change as a leader after this?
Wow. This is I guess as I'm walking through these experiences in home and at work, I think for me, the necessity to help to really know, it comes back to Aristotle, know thyself, and to have that, and to really believe and have that grounded sense of confidence. But that comes from being aware. I think the importance for me of what I've learned through this is to have self-trust, and the importance of courage right now, and the capacity to be able to pivot. And we can know the work, study the work, but we've got to be and do the work. So for me, it's really around living and breathing the work. And that takes courage. I remember the first day that I got onto this project, I was actually shaking. And I thought, hang on a minute. I stepped in and what are you feeling, thinking and doing? And grounded myself. Actually, you got this, girl. You can do this. So I think part of it is we are going to have the necessity, I was thinking about it yesterday, to unlearn and relearn, and we're going to need to do that. But we're going to need to, for me, it's about, continuing to grow and learn, but practice. It's going to take practice, and to be compassionate with yourself as well. We're a work in progress, but it's, the necessity to be able to step out and be courageous.
Mark, short answer from you, and then Yvette.
Very quickly, I'll say that in my conversation yesterday with Eric Larson and reading his book about Winston Churchill, that one of the things that he did was he was always incredibly encouraging, which when you're being bombed every night, you think, well, how can he justify that, right? And what I learned at the end of the book, and Eric punctuated this, is that he truly believed in the resilience of people. And so that's my big takeaway, is that when I'm encouraging, when I'm trying to convey positivity, optimism, and hope, that's not a Pollyanna approach to this, that people truly are, whether they're depressed, whether they're lonely, whether they're in grief, all those kinds of things. Ultimately, people will get to the other side of this. And sometimes you just need somebody. I'm sure everybody here can agree. It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Sometimes people have said that to me, and like, it just completely shook me. Like, I am okay. I can go.
Yvette, how about for you? What's going to be different for you on the other side in your own leadership?
Finding in this process that I'm using a lot more optimism that I didn't know that I had. And so I'm optimistic about human ecosystems and how they can work together differently, and how I'm actually committing myself to really developing the ecosystem so that it has a heart, and it's not just one person or the other person, but the whole team has a heart, and the whole team is connected. And so the more I think about it, it's really about connecting with that authenticity and optimism to get there.
I think for me, I have for years been focused on paying more attention to emotions and trying to be more courageous about being willing to say what I'm feeling and share that. But I sometimes perceive there's a difference between me as a coach or me as a facilitator and me as a senior manager, in that my management style is fairly task-oriented. And so I think one of the things that I'm thinking about on the other side of this is being, as I think I'm very brave as a coach, and I think I'm very brave as a facilitator. And I think it's time for me to be more brave as a senior leader, to name what I'm feeling and to invite people to name what they're feeling. And if it feels complicated in some ways, I'm still afraid of emotions. It feels complicated to do that, and like, oh, that might take a lot of time. But I know from the coaching and facilitating, I know how powerful it is. And so I feel this sense of my heart expanding and opening, and it's kind of scary, but at the same time, I like it. Let's come back to a couple of questions from the chat. So who wants to talk a little bit more about optimism? How do you do it? How do you, Mark brought up optimism. A couple others have brought up optimism. Angela, you want to jump on that one? How do you actually bring optimism forward?
I anchor to optimism every day. So, and I think for me, it's a practice. What are the things that you're going to do that are going to help you to fuel those positive feelings? For me, it could be, in the morning, I meditate and, I pause and get still, and activate this vagal breathing. Then I'm out, for me, nature, walking, gratitude, savoring, pausing to stop and notice the good things. So, and even at dinner at night with my children, it's, what are the good things that have happened today? We always have a dinner conversation. What's something positive that happened today? And what's an awareness or an insight that you got today? So I think it's building the discipline of, fueling the activity that you're doing, things that are, giving compliments, acts of kindness, ensuring that I'm connecting. These are the things that I do. I make them a practice, a daily habit. Like you go to the gym, build a practice around how am I fueling positive emotions. Dr. Rick Hanson's work's got on his site, lots of little positivity hacks, things that we can include in our day.
So there's an interesting tension sometimes between shying away from the difficult stuff. And I think that could be a whole nother show where we talk about this challenge of being willing to confront I think in Good to Great, the phrase was to confront the brutal facts of our reality, no matter how terrible. And I think that's an interesting Churchill challenge. And I think there's a very interesting connection between that optimism and empathy. Yvette, would you just touch on empathy and how do we actually grow that?
Your quote about confronting the brutal facts about reality is actually how I actually process and become optimistic. And it's because over the years, so many things have happened in my life. As with everybody, you've had some defining moments that are extraordinarily difficult. And I found that, and why I'm able to be optimistic is because no matter what happened and no matter how dismal and disappointing or even crippling the situation may have been, it was every single time I came out of it a better person. Every single time I came out of it with hope. Every single time I came out of it with deeper love and connection and gratitude. And so with this process, I'm excited to see what I'm going to be next and what's possible for the world next. It's not only about me, it's about everybody. What's possible and how do we help bring out the best by connecting, helping people to connect with their own optimism.
It's beautiful. Mark, there's another question from Christy, which is that I think a lot of us can relate to who work in companies where we might be being given one message from one part of the company and another message from another part, and sometimes torn between those. So how can somebody be really true to themselves and do what they're supposed to do when their boss is saying, don't tell this, or don't
well,
say
I mean, that's a really tricky situation, obviously, right? Because you don't want to compromise what you're being told not to share. I think it's a fine line there. I will tell you, though, that I had a leader very early in my career. This was, I had the unfortunate experience of working in these organizations that, got to a certain point and then couldn't grow. And so they had to be sold off, and people were terrified about what was going to happen to their jobs and so forth. And even to the customers, how were they going to respond to what was happening? And so what he did was he said, I need to bring everyone in this room into my confidence. And we were just in a meeting where we were asked really to hold back on sharing certain information. So you can't violate the trust, but what you can do is to say, I need to bring you into my confidence. And if you can sustain that confidence, then I can give you more of an insight that I think will help you in maneuvering through this. So this is a sense that I have of where things could go, is what I would say, without compromising what's not being allowed to be told. So if somebody says, absolutely do not share this with your people, you absolutely can't share it with your people. I mean, I think unless you want to be fired. And the time to have the discussion with the person saying that to you is before you go back out to your people. But what you can do is give people nuance. This is what possibility is. This is what the challenge is. This is what I think people are looking at right now. You can hint in a lot of different ways, as long as you have a relationship where people are understanding that you are intentionally sharing information with them that is for them only and not to be shared outside of it. So it's what I found was that people were so honored and so grateful that he would do that there was no way they were going to betray that trust. So
we're just going to say, we're coming back to trust, right? When there's trust there's so much we can do to build more trust. Well, folks, somehow our hour is just about up. So I would like to just ask you each to share what's one takeaway from today. What is something you heard? What is something you're going to hold on to? Those of you who are watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would put in the chat what's something you're going to take away from today. And Alex, let's go to you. What's something you're going to take away? And just please keep these short because we're almost out of time.
I think bringing these derivatives of love to the forefront as often as possible in this moment of time feels just critical.
Thank you, Alex. Angela?
I think, the analogy about Winston Churchill, confronting the brutal facts, yet also tempering that with empathy and compassion. So ensuring that you're holding space for both.
Yvette?
I'm going to stick with optimism. I believe that that's going to be one of the central things to us coming out the other side of this alive and kicking.
And Mark?
That word courage is the Latin derivation. The word cor means heart. So, and Josh, this really goes to you. What I'm taking from this is just the reminder that don't hold back on who you are. If you have feelings, you want to express them, express them. Nobody's gonna look at you suddenly and go, "Oh, he's suddenly not an effective leader." I think right now you're actually playing to people's strengths. They're looking to you to demonstrate that you are having feelings, so that they can then express their own. So by being courageous yourself, you give people the ability to be courageous themselves.
So true.
Thank you, Mark. Well, what I'm taking away is there's nobody dropping bombs on us right now.
We're safe.
Right? A reason to be optimistic.
I mean, it feels like it some days, but I do think it's important to have some perspective. And these are serious, big challenges. And leaders and people, humans, have weathered serious and big challenges. And over my shoulder here is a dot painting from the other side of Australia, from where Angela lives. And, the First Nations people of Australia perceive 40,000 years of history that they experience in these dot paintings. And, we've been through a lot. And I think that we're going to find a way through this one too. So thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate your time and insights and heart. And Tom, we're back to you.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for this inspiring conversation, and thank you for all of you who joined live and those watching. If you like this, please make sure you share it with other people. We would love to see everyone watching this video right now and tell the world why this conversation matters to you. I also want to remind you that we have powerful supportive classes every day during the week at Growing You Online. They're free or very low cost. These are authentic, caring conversation where you work live online with a skilled facilitator to grow your EQ skills. I also want to remind you that in this challenging time as a nonprofit, we need your support financially if you can donate, but equally important is your involvement, joining, sharing, communicating. In the world right now, EQ is becoming precious. Let's make sure we keep practicing and sharing. And in case you have not seen next week's schedule, our next panel next week will be a big one, Climate of Emotions, at the intersection of youth, emotions, and climate change. And it's going to be on April 21st at 7:30 Pacific time, and it's going to go for a few hours. We have a lot of exciting speakers joining us. We'll put the link in the chat so you can register. And thank you for joining us and for all you're doing to share and grow EQ. We'll see you online soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks,